ethics watchdog bars U.S. government employees from writing crypto policy if invested. And I believe that this is the de minimis exemption, but basically federal employees who have invested less than $50,000 in a mutual fund with exposure to the crypto sector will still be allowed to work on crypto-related policies, but officials who hold up to $50,000 in mutual funds that include crypto companies can still work on policies, but if they hold above that, then they can't, which I think is kind of counterproductive, because don't you want people who are well versed on how this crypto ecosystem works when you're putting laws into place that could potentially change things? And also, too, this law applies to all federal government agencies, including the United States Treasury, the Federal Reserve, the White House, and apparently there is a Biden tech advisor, Tim Wu, who holds millions of dollars in Bitcoin, who will not be able to do this. I saw Will's hand go up, so let's get into it. Will, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is a very interesting new regulation for government employees. And this actually matches a lot of conversations in journalism circles as well. A lot of mainstream media outlets don't allow their reporters to hold assets for conversations that they're having with people. So if you're covering like airplane stocks, typically you're not allowed to hold airplane stocks in your portfolio, or at the very least, you have to heavily disclose that you are long or short certain stocks. CoinDesk has its own rules and regulations for how much crypto you can hold, how much you can disclose, stuff like that. And some outlets out there don't allow anyone to hold any crypto, mainstream and crypto rags themselves. So I think a lot of this is just pretty like mundane, like you're expected to see this. The interesting thing is when you toss it back to Congress, right? Which Congress has tried in the past to regulate itself, around equities, stock holdings, and it's never gone through. And there's a lot of people within Congress who have made a lot of money over the last few years with stocks, and I'm sure crypto as well. And they're not necessarily recused from holding those things. This also reminds me of a story from, I think, 6 months ago or so about Federal Reserve employees who were also making stock choices right before very consequential Fed decisions came out. A lot of those Fed policymakers were asked to resign or just chose to resign themselves after that information came to light. But what you're seeing, Wendy, is basically people with low integrity needing to be pushed into places of integrity. They don't typically are asked to do this, and so now they have to have this ethics guideline go through. Jen, I'm going to throw it to you.
Yeah, I'm with Wendy on this one. I read this and I just thought this is silly. I think probably last year we spoke about something similar and Naomi Brockwell said, well, if you have the US dollar, should you not work on financial policy? And so I'm just going to kick it back to Naomi. I think this is silly, but Will, to your point, it makes sense. We've seen this before and I think it's something that we should have expected. It's just so interesting to me. We see these policymakers, we see Congress, they keep saying, they're looking for more information. They have these committees that are out there gathering information. They're educating themselves. And to me, educating yourself on how something works would start at using it. If we're making policy for end users, wouldn't we want that policy to be made by people who have used that thing that we're trying to regulate so they can understand the real risks associated? So Wendy, I'm with you. But Adam, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, I think that the conversation about this topic has actually been great and has kind of covered both sides of the issue here. The thing that I would add is it's about appearance of conflicts of interest more than it is about actual conflicts of interest. And what we see here is an inconsistent application of the policy across multiple sectors, which in reality are quite similar in terms of if you're invested in a thing, well, then you might be predisposed to having, policies and to making rules that are more supportive of the thing that you hold. That's true no matter whether you're talking about crypto or you're talking about congressional trading, or you're talking about any of these other things. The Federal Reserve thing was Federal Reserve Board of Governors. So these are literally the smartest, most well-qualified people in the room who are making decisions that drive what markets are going to do in a very real sense over the last number of years due to the monetary policy that we've had, who are then trading on that knowledge in advance. And so again, when this comes out, then you see these types of, oh, we should ban this and stuff like that. But the real kind of people who have the power and who really abuse this power, they're never going to regulate themselves against these things. And so you just wind up with this sort of it's the law so long as it's not a thing that we care about. And if it is a thing that we care about, then we're going to make rules that treat ourselves differently than we would apply to other people. So it's unfortunately consistent that government does this. Power likes power, and power likes to keep power. And that's what you see over and over again with these types of topics. Wendy, back to you.
Before I toss it over to you, Adam, for your story, the only difference or the only thing that I want to point out is when I think about cryptocurrency compared to stocks. With crypto, a lot of these projects, they have some sort of utility. Like you actually need to play around with it to understand how it works. Like you can talk about an NFT all you want. You could talk about smart contracts. You could talk about using Ethereum or Solana or Cardano or whatever it is. You could talk about a DAO. You could talk about running nodes. But unless you actually do it yourself, it doesn't necessarily click because we're talking about utilizing something that's intangible as opposed to going to McDonald's or getting on a plane or whatnot. So that's my only gripe that I have is I feel like I would want people who know how this stuff works that actually have played around with it because I'm more of a user. I like to get my hands dirty. That's just me though, but go ahead, Adam.
So I'll take us to our next story in just a second, but a real quick note, there's been a line of thinking very much similar to what you just said there, that it would be better to have people making the rules who understand the technology in a way that is more kind of actionable than like some sort of like high level technical understanding, but is instead like understands the nuances of the thing. That was the story behind SEC Chair Gary Gensler. He went into kind of the private sector, taught about blockchain, was very much recognized as an expert, got into power, in a position of power, to actually regulate the space, and has been worse than the regulators who didn't know what they were doing, has not added any extra clarity. So, I mean, like, I could give you a laundry list of examples like this of people who know better, but when they're put in a position of power, intentionally, or at least seemingly intentionally, do the opposite of the thing that you would want. But what are you thinking?
Man.
I mean, there's a lot of pressure.
That's because the SEC is currently battling against Ripple, and they do not want to disclose a lot of different things to the public or during the case. So that's the only thing that I'm going to say about that. We'll talk about it more on my channel. Actually, I should have you guys on to debate this more because I could go on about this topic like
the after hours hash.
Yeah, we should do after hours show.